Canada joins the international community in expressing its grave concern with the passage of national security legislation for Hong Kong by mainland China. Canada is a firm believer in the one country, two system framework. We will continue to support the many connections between Canada and Hong Kong while also standing up for its people.
Canada has announced a policy shift on Hong Kong today. The federal government has suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong in response to the new national security law that China has imposed on the region. That security law gives China more power to police anti-government protests that have raged in Hong Kong for more than a year. Critics of the Chinese law say it undermines the autonomy of the former British colony. Canada will also now treat sensitive goods being exported to Hong Kong as if they are being sent to mainland China. And effective immediately, Canada will not permit the export of sensitive military items to the region. So, how will China react to these Canadian measures, and what does China's new law mean for the 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong? Gordon Houlden served as a Canadian diplomat to both Hong Kong and to Beijing. He is now the director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta, and he joins us now from Penticton, BC. Welcome back to the program, Mr. Houlden. I want to ask your reaction to these new measures that the government has announced today.
I think there had to be a riposte because the Chinese legislation is both thorough but also vague, and it cuts at some of the fundamental freedoms that people in Hong Kong have taken for granted and should take for granted in terms of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. There's a risk there that almost anyone who openly opposes the government, not just, let's say, in a violent demonstration, but through organization, supporting Hong Kong freedoms through what they might write or say, is potentially at risk. I think Hong Kong, the Beijing authorities will be a little bit cautious in how they implement legislation. There's already been one person who's been charged as guilty of terrorism or potentially guilty of terrorism, but the risk is always there. And for activists, of whom there are many, they are at risk. And we have a lot at stake in Hong Kong.
Certainly want to talk about that. I want to start, though, with what you said earlier, which was the idea that some sort of riposte was necessary. The Prime Minister left the door open today to the possibility of further measures, talked about looking at immigration. What else do you think Canada ought to be doing?
Well, it is a difficult thing, because on the one hand, you don't necessarily want to accelerate the demise of Hong Kong as a relatively free and open trading system and a place where there are still some freedoms left that are far, far superior to that which is enjoyed on the mainland. Freedom of religion, for example, choice of schooling, curriculum, those sorts of things are still relatively liberal in Hong Kong as opposed to the mainland. So you don't want to kick out the props from what's left of Hong Kong's special status under one country, two systems. On the other hand, there had to be a reaction. What I think will come now, must come now, will be an indication what to do about the political dissidents. The 300,000 that are there are free to come to Canada as soon as they get flights, but with COVID, that's not easy. I don't think all will leave. It's not easy to give up where you've been for a long time, and you may not have a profession or a way to earn a living in Canada or somewhere else. So many will stay, many will leave. But I think for those who are involved in the demonstrations, who are activists in favor of Hong Kong independence, which is utterly unacceptable to Beijing, some of those people will be seeking safe havens. But it won't be easy because the Hong Kong government can control who leaves as well as who enters, and they may be putting some of those people through a fine screen. In some cases, they may be happy just to have them leave. But they are nervous, I believe, about, they being Beijing, about political activism aimed at China from abroad. That's historically a worry for China. So I think we're going to see the movement of people as the center of the issue right now. Military exports to Hong Kong must have been vanishingly small. Dual-use technologies, perhaps, some equipment for the Hong Kong police, all that is put on hold. What really matters, I think, is the strong opposition and words like standing with the people of Hong Kong. Those are fighting words in the eyes of Beijing.
You say it's about people right now. Is there more that Canada could or should be doing to help enable both Canadians, some of those 300,000 Canadians to come home, but perhaps others who might be seeking asylum? Is there more the Canadian government can be doing on that front?
Well, I think a lot of preparation has been done already by our mission in Hong Kong and by the government of Hong Kong for eventuality we didn't want to face. But COVID has made all of that more difficult. When I last served in Hong Kong, we had about 250,000. I can recall if you flew 747s in and they landed at the rate of every 2 or 3 minutes, you'd still take a few weeks to take them out. So there is a potential. We're not there yet because I think a lot of people will stay or wait and see. But now the planning has to begin for very large numbers at a time when COVID, these are very difficult. Flights are very expensive. There are very few. Just even receiving large number of people coming from Hong Kong and settling them, you could fill, in theory, every hotel space in Canada accommodating those sorts of numbers. Again, I don't think that's imminent, but the planning for such eventualities must intensify now.
Let's talk a little bit about the Chinese reaction to all of this. We see these moves by the Canadian government today. We talk about the possibility of more action. How might we expect China to respond to Canada, if it does at all? Because obviously that is already an incredibly complex relationship. We think all immediately, of course, of the two Michaels.
With the two Michaels, but our stake in, historically, Canadian troops fought and died in Hong Kong to protect it from the Japanese. We've had an office there since 1923. We have closer connections to Hong Kong on a per capita basis, at least, than any other spot in Asia. Very close. You can't bump into someone on the street who doesn't have an uncle or aunt living in Toronto or Vancouver. Very dense human connections. A word of caution, though, in my opinion, Beijing has set its course, and we can react and should react. We should do what we can to help the people of Hong Kong, but the idea that they're going to change their views, that is China, withdraw that legislation, go back to the status quo ante, to me that's not in the cards. So what we do, I think, has to be posited on what will help the people of Hong Kong. Forcing China to back up, retract, go back to where they were, I don't see that as likely or even feasible from Beijing's perspective now.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your insights.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.